I am your humble webinar moderator for today. Happy Monday. It is my honor and privilege to help support you today in this webinar. I just want to let you know this is going to be live streamed, so if there's any consideration about you participating in a live stream, just be aware we are live streaming across a few platforms for Chief AIO Officer. The other thing is that we will have our recommended but not required post webinar feedback survey. We're always happy that you guys can give us your feedback so we can continue to improve. Other than that, today's session with Stephen is uh, we warmly welcome all participation in the moment. Any questions, comments, concerns, or queries that you may have at the time, please feel free to either type it in the chat or come off mute if you are able and willing to do that. And Stephen will address you right away. And if you're having any issues with that, you can always reach out to me and I can help you as well. Other than that, without further ado, I would like to warmly welcome Stephen Murphy, the VP of ARG, as well as a Chief AI Officer. And please let me know if you guys need anything. Enjoy the webinar and welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Alexandra. Well, first of all, thank you very much for joining, and good afternoon, good morning, maybe even good evening, depending upon where you're located. This is the second in a series of 3 HR presentations that I was asked to conduct. My name is Steve Murphy. Feel free to interrupt at any time during the presentation. Just a little bit about me before we get going. I am not an HR operator. I actually don't know a ton about HR. I was asked to conduct these sessions because I was invited to speak at an HR symposium in January. I posted it in the community board, and they thought it was a good opportunity for us to bring some of this content to the larger CAIO community. My background is in consulting. I've been in technology consulting for about 20 years, generally consulting with small and medium-sized businesses. Before that, I worked at Accenture, so I was consulting with larger Fortune 500 type of businesses. And prior to that, I was a certified public accountant working for a large one of the top CPA firms in the industry at that point in time. So what I decided to do in terms of presenting this content, since I'm not an HR expert, I thought I would take the approach of presenting it as a consultant. How does a consultant approach the human resources organization? Terry Moten has a ton of good content that she recorded, presented to the community in the summer of last year. And she's more of an HR operator. So if you want to get the insights of someone who sort of in the weeds and behind the scenes of HR, she has that. She has a lot of good information in those videos. This again is going to be centered around how to consult to excuse me, let me just shut down an application here. How to consult with HR organizations. Oh, I'm just going to leave that alone. All right. Again, invite you to come in and answer or ask any questions that you might have. I'm going to start with a quick summary of what we covered in the last session, just to get everyone on the same page. So, Alexander, can you see my screen?
Sure can.
Awesome. Let me just move the controls here. Okay. So quickly, by way of agenda, we're going to do a quick summary again of what we talked about last time. And the last time was really why HR is a great opportunity for AI consultants. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what HR does and what their main priorities are, what the HR technology stack looks like, how to identify use cases and what's that process look like within the HR organization, how to evaluate those use cases, and how to do business case development for those use cases. Again, this is me acting as a consultant to an HR organization. So we're going to take that approach. So the first section here is really why HR is a great opportunity for HR consultants. My personal belief is that HR deserves and should capture, should insist upon participating as a leader in the organization with regard to AI adoption. That's because fundamentally, I think AI is a human resource. It's essentially a workforce operating model that requires huge behavioral changes. And we're going to change the way almost every knowledge worker does their job, performs their job over time. There's going to be a lot of disruption in people's workflows and the types of skills that they're going to have. The entire culture of an organization could very well be transformed over the next 3 to 5 years, not a very long time, as they adopt more and more AI capabilities. Uh, the change management here and the apprehension will be huge opportunities for HR to manage those emotional waves that the organization will encounter, both waves of excitement and waves of despair, quite honestly, as people don't know how to do their jobs the way that they did it in the past, or excitement and being able to do much more in your role than you've been able to do in the past because you have different tools and different automations available to you. HR is the center within the organization for training and evaluating and getting feedback from the organization at large. As I was doing this symposium with this HR organization in January, it was really more of a conversation. We hardly ever got to my slide deck itself, but one of the stories that I heard during that was a company that launched Microsoft Copilot to the entire organization all at once, and there was no training at all. It was just sort of showed up one day and started, coaching people on how to write emails and things of that nature. And the HR leader went to IT and said, "What's going on here? How did this happen?" And IT said, "Well, uh, we we were told to get Copilot out to everyone, but there's no adoption process, no adoption methodology, no training considered. Had they worked with HR before, just sort of throwing a solution out into the wild, wild west within their organization, they would have been able to manage that transition much more effectively." And essentially, what they ended up doing was they turned down Copilot, got that training organized, rolled it out in a methodical fashion, and the adoption was actually much better, and they were able to use it much more effectively going forward. So HR, in my opinion, is really in the best organizational position to manage the adoption aspects of AI, even if it's something that is happening within a particular department or group within the organization, even if it's somewhat more confined. I think HR has a great role to play in terms of positioning themselves as the folks who can manage the transition and help people through the interpersonal or even personal situations that they're going to find themselves in as things change so dramatically. And then, why is HR a good option for consultants? Well, I actually think prospecting to HR is a lot easier than prospecting to other organizations or other departments within a company. And the reason for that is HR is more of an open organization. They have fewer vendors hitting them up for appointments and trying to get in to talk to them about new things. So the HR team generally is very open to having those conversations just because there's not as much exhaustion around speaking to new vendors. They understand that there's a huge need to deliver organizational-wide AI training. Most companies, especially in the mid-market and smaller companies, haven't done organizational-wide training for AI at all. There may be some department by department type of training that's been available, maybe for a few point solutions that they've deployed. But generally, there's nothing corporate wide, and there's also probably not even a corporate wide AI policy. That's another area that HR can contribute in terms of being a leader there, drafting that AI policy for the organization, and that's something that they would need an AI consultant to help them frame. I've mentioned that HR tends to be much more open to new relationships, and they also have very broad social networks. So, as I mentioned, there's speaking opportunities are a really good opportunity for you to get out in front of HR, multiple HR leaders at one time. And these social networks are very expansive. So, if you can get into one, it's actually pretty easy to get into others. And you might even find yourself having a champion, an HR champion, to help you get into some of these other organizations. And then lastly, the HR leaders generally have a very high interest in productivity tools. As we'll see in just a few moments, HR has generally been considered a cost center. It's becoming less and less so as we move into new ways of managing enterprises. But as a cost center, they've been asked to do more with less generally. And so they're very interested in finding ways to become more productive. So in summary, HR, I think, is a natural leader for AI adoption. They are not the leader. They're not the ones that are going to be out there telling different organizations what AI solutions they should be looking at, but they should be working alongside those organizations when they are trying to adopt or to even test an AI opportunity to really be the ones who can help lead the human elements of that transition. They're much more receptive to AI consulting programs generally, and they have strong cross-organizational relationships that will help you be introduced to the broader organization through these conversations. So let's take a look at HR. Generally, HR has four main categories, four main operating domains. First one, and the one that most people think of when they think of HR, is recruiting, talent acquisition. And probably most of the HR organizations that I've become familiar with over the last couple of months, talent acquisition, while that's what everyone thinks, is actually maybe a quarter, so one fourth of what HR actually spends most of its time on, but it's the most visible because everything else that HR does tends to be considered more of like a utility. It just works. The talent acquisition is where other organizational, other department leaders have to go to get new jobs posted and to get an influx of potential candidates and that initial screening. So that's what people think HR does most of the time. But they spend the rest of their time doing things like employee relations, answering questions about vacation and managing the personal interface that employees have. If someone has a life event and they need to take an extended leave, that's an HR employee relations type of operation. If a lot of larger companies have alumni relations that the HR organization tends to run. So pretty much anything that employees need from the organization is an HR focus. They're sort of the customer service organization for the staff of the company. Compensation. People think they just get paid automatically, but compensation is a huge process within an HR organization, and it will, be an all hands on deck. If something goes wrong with compensation, it needs to be fixed immediately. There's a lot of opportunities for AI there, but also a lot of risk. One of the things I'll talk about a little bit further in this presentation, in terms of the use cases that you want to evaluate, is how much risk do you want to take on within your customer base? And I would say anything around compensation is probably one of those areas that you might want to think hard on before you get involved in anything that is impactful to the regular payments to staff. The last category is training and development. So in small companies, HR may not actually play a leading role in training and development because a lot of small companies don't have a formal training and development program. It's an opportunity for HR to take that on. And there are some great solutions within the AI industry that can facilitate them being able to roll training out in a very customized, very tailored way for various departments. So training and development, if they have it, would benefit from AI. If they don't have it, it's actually a pretty efficient way of launching some of these training programs by using AI solutions. So I mentioned HR has generally been viewed as a cost center, but that is changing very rapidly as organizations are beginning to manage all of their departments as business units rather than just support organizations. But historically, they've been underfunded and under prioritized because they've been essentially a cog in the machine, something that's necessary to keep things moving, but maybe not necessarily considered like a revenue generator or uh, a huge strategic benefit or strategic asset to the organization. I think we have the opportunity to help the HR leaders change that. But today, what they're faced with, and they haven't really been faced with this as much in the past, is justifying ROIs for investments. And they were actually, being assigned KPIs to track, excuse me, as systems become more ubiquitous and more mature and have the benefit of generating these KPIs. HR is starting to have to report against these KPIs and work on improving them over time. They need to measure the impacts not only through KPIs but otherwise of their operations. So things like how many hires did they bring in? What was the speed of each hire? How long was a particular vacancy, particular job role open? And what's the cost impact to the organization of maintaining that vacancy over a longer period of time than potentially necessary? And essentially, they've just been asked to do more with less. So they've been asked to do all of these things without really getting any incremental funding. So the HR leader is pretty desperate, generally, for new and creative options for improving their operations. And Alexander, let me just take a quick pause. I am not monitoring the chat, so if there are any questions that come up in the chat, could you please let me know, and we'll
Of
I'll
course, right
talk
now
to those
everyone
immediately.
seems confidently wrapped with what you are saying. I
Perfect.
don't see anything in the chat. But
Perfect.
everybody, if there are things in the chat that somehow are not coming to me, just give a holler.
I have a quick question, if that's okay, Stephen.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you described some of the, I believe some of the use cases here, the talent acquisition, employee relations, compensation, training, and development. Is it that these HR reps need to learn need to be better at prompting to help insights, grab insights, or is it more going through the chief AI officer type of workflow where you're gathering like their workflows, their clicks, what they're doing, and trying to optimize those type of process? And the second part of that question is it multiple systems that they are, have to go inside of to grab a lot of metrics and stuff? I'm just trying to understand some of these use cases here a little bit more.
Yeah, so we'll get to identifying the use cases, but to answer your question directly, I think HR, certainly has great and talented people, but they're being asked to do things that are frequently outside of their natural skill set. So things like financial analyses, things like statistical analyses are not the typical skill set that you have within an HR organization. So as these systems become more mature and make this data available to them, they now have to figure out how to work with it. In terms of identifying the use cases, that's really up to the individual human resources organization. We're going to get into what that process looks like in just a little bit. I hope I answered your question. I'm not certain I did though. So could
Yeah,
you?
that's okay. We'll wait till
Okay.
the end as I see more slides. And if I have further
Okay.
questions, I'll ask. Thank you.
Great. So what keeps and if there are no other questions, let me just pause real quickly while we've got a break here. Okay. Um, what keeps an HR leader up at night? So these are sort of the top 10 HR issues that your leaders are trying to accommodate within their new workflows and trying to improve upon. So the first and foremost is trying to quantify HR's value. How can they deliver value back to the organization as a traditional cost function? Their job was to keep the lights on within the human resources organization and to fill vacancies, but that's not sufficient anymore. So they really have to become value provisioners back to the organization. So there are AI opportunities there as you talk with these leaders. Workforce planning, including the impacts of AI. So if we're going to launch an AI program to an organization, what is that going to do? What is it going to reduce staff? Is it going to change the type of skill set that those staff needs? What type of training and skilling up is required? These are all very challenging questions for the organization, and HR should really be seen as the department within a company that can help answer some of those questions. I've mentioned talent acquisition a couple of times, making sure that they're bringing the right candidates in and making sure that the candidates are being screened accurately. Retention and engagement. It's far less expensive to retain an employee through engagement opportunities, for example, than it is to try to replace an employee. So retention and engagement, it might be one of those areas that AI can play a significant role in. So, for example, running surveys throughout the organization to understand levels of engagement, for example. The fifth one is designing how work works, and it's kind of a tongue twister, but designing how the future of work is going to look within a company. And generally, this is really more about the knowledge workers within a company. Like if you're a home builder, AI may not have a dramatic effect as to how your carpenters swing hammers, right? That's probably not something that you're going to get involved in, but AI may have a dramatic effect as to how they go about their social media campaigns, about how they generate bids for projects, how they forecast their business going forward. So figuring out how that works and figuring out how things like work from home or hybrid work environments or completely remote work will change the work environment and the culture of the organization. Role and compensation equity, huge issue now. AI can play a very effective has a very effective role potentially in understanding how people are being compensated and whether or not they're being compensated fairly across the board, taking into consideration things like experience, geographic location, and so forth that are very difficult for people to pull together and analyze. Skill development and reskilling, talked about that in a couple of different contexts, but understanding what the workforce is going to need in the future. We've probably all heard this because we work in the industry, but the great averaging, where pretty much all employees are going to be average because they're all working with the same AI tools generally. So how does HR help the organization differentiate themselves and upskill and become better at what they've done, better than the competition? There's going to be a huge need for that going forward within the organization. Performance management, everyone or most companies I'm familiar with has a formal review process, and making sure that people are being fairly evaluated for their performance, and making sure that those key variables are being stored and analyzed and viewed across the entire organization to make sure that individual managers, for example, don't have a different way of evaluating their own employee base. It is going to be very important. Culture leadership, I've mentioned that a couple of times. AI is going to change the culture of an organization, and it's up to the HR department, I believe, to help maintain the current culture or to direct that cultural shift to a positive outcome. And then compliance and risk management. This is super important as we become, unfortunately, a more litigious society, and companies operate under different states and maybe different regulatory constructs. They're going to need help in assessing their regulatory compliance, and AI is actually a very good opportunity to do that, maybe on an informal basis before they might be going to undertake a formal compliance audit, for example. You might want to run an AI tool against your policies and procedures to check compliance against various geographies or various other regulatory constructs, frameworks. All right, so why is HR great opportunity for this? High transaction volume with repetitive workflows. Like we talked about talent acquisitions. Many organizations, I spoke one of the anecdotes that was raised during the session that I ran in January was one company was looking for a new CFO. They posted the job on a couple of job boards, and they literally got over 1,000 resumes for a single position. They were actually using an AI screening tool for that posting, and they really weren't happy with the outcome. They said it really screened out a lot of very viable candidates. Well, that's an opportunity for a consultant to come in and understand what they did and how they configured that screening tool, and whether or not they ran a pilot for it and ran a few resume test cases through it to make sure they were getting the results, or did they just configure something and let it run for one of the most important roles in the organization? Just an example of how consultants can help an HR organization there. Critical decisions with incomplete information are being made within HR all the time. And by critical, we're talking about what's the right pay rate for people? Someone has a medical condition. What's the right allowance or compensation that people need to be aware that's available to them. Let's say someone was injured on the job. Those types of things can be facilitated through AI very easily without requiring the level of human involvement that's required today. We talked a little bit about regulatory and compliance complexity, things like pay parity, bias auditing, making sure that your hiring is fair, for example, privacy, and again, the geographic requirements that are becoming more and more important over time. Talked about the pressure to do more with less, and then the direct impact on business performance. So the people that HR brings in are really the primary drivers of the organization. And HR needs tools and opportunity systems to make sure that they're always getting the best people for the organization. So let's talk a little bit about the HR technology stack, and then we'll get into identifying use cases and how we can consult within this. So this is a list of the HR technology stack. We'll go through it, but I want to note here at the very beginning that not all organizations have all of these systems, especially in the middle market. A lot of HR organizations have very bare bones systems, and that's actually a huge opportunity for AI consultants. And the reason why I say that is that we can come in and we can provide some very simple AI features or agents to do what some of these systems would do at a fraction of the price. So, for example, if an organization doesn't have an applicant tracking system, we can create a few AI agents to do some of those main components, like managing and automatically posting job openings, reviewing applications, and so forth. with a couple of AI tools very inexpensively versus buying a complete applicant tracking system. Most organizations are going to have some form of a human resource information system, whether that's outsourced through some sort of payroll provider or it's insourced. That's generally table stakes. Almost everyone has something today that tracks their ongoing employees and manages payroll and so forth. A learning management system is something that only really the largest organizations that at least I'm familiar with have. And by that, what I mean is being a central repository for the training materials for the organization, things like course catalogs, certifications, allowing people to enroll and matriculate from these online courses generally. Performance management systems, so tracking people's performance. Again, this is an area that really only the very largest organizations have, but it's an opportunity for an AI consultant to come in and create a feedback loop to help manage people's performance over time, or even just consolidate the performance information that is gathered at year end or whenever people are scheduled to do their traditional performance reviews. Engagement and survey tools, great opportunity to sort of check the pulse of the organization. If you're familiar with the Net Promoter Scoring system for organizations, a lot of HR departments are exploring a Net Promoter Scoring system for the organization to see how engaged, how happy employees are with the broader organization. So that's something that you could actually bring an AI solution to help them figure that out and help them calculate that on a regular basis. And then people analytics and business intelligence tools. HR, as I said, has a need now to report against KPIs and to show continuous improvement in their operations. Well, how do they track that? They have a bunch of systems here. Do they have a way of bringing the key elements of these various systems into a single dashboard so the leadership can review in real time their performance against these key business drivers? So let's get into use case identification. And here I'm going to talk about a top-down approach and a bottoms-up approach. So I always start with a top-down approach because we're generally starting with someone in the leadership role within an HR organization. I always want to understand if they have a mission statement or a strategy statement for the HR role. And when was the last time that they revised it or did a deep dive as to whether or not it's still effective? Because you want to make sure that what you're working with the most current information with the most current strategic initiatives. So you're going to take the strategy statement and then you're going to take the KPIs that the organization is tracking against. So in this case, some hypothetical KPIs might be time to hire, which is essentially the time that it takes to fill a vacancy. What's the cost to hire that individual? What's the quality of the hire? And by this, you're looking at performance down the road. So was it a good hire? Generally, you have to wait 6 to 12 months to be able to figure that out, but you need a mechanism in order to perform that review 6 to 12 months out. And that's something that AI could potentially have a role in. An offer acceptance rate might be a KPI that they're tracking. Candidate experience scores, so satisfaction surveys that they take on when they're onboarded about the recruitment process, for example. Source effectiveness, so during that onboarding process, where the sources and resources provided to that individual sufficient to get them up and running. And then tracking fairness within their processes, both in terms of recruiting and in terms of operating the staffing environment at large. So you're going to look at these strategic initiatives or strategic objectives and the KPIs that they track, and you're going to come up with some top-down AI use cases. I just threw out some. These are hypothetical, doesn't apply to any particular organization, but you want to identify some generic use cases that you think might help the organization hit those objectives that they've laid out to the company. So once you come up with these rather high-level use cases, not all of these are actionable, quite honestly. The next step would be to run a workshop within the HR organization. And here again, maybe I wasn't clear. These are use cases for HR in particular, not outside the HR organization. So you want to run a workshop. Generally starts with a team discussion. Hey, where are you spending most of your time? What's really repetitive? What don't you think is value add? What would you like to get rid of so you can do more, better, and add more value to the organization? You're going to get some use cases out of that. And then what I like to do is have a curated list of use cases for the particular operation already prepared. And in this case, we're looking at talent acquisition. So this is a set of use cases that I constructed after doing a couple of different searches, and came up with about 40 different use cases that a typical HR organization could use with regard to their particular talent acquisition or recruiting function. And then I'll spend maybe the last 30% of this team discussion on going through these use cases. This is more about the art of the possible than what they're currently experiencing. The team discussion is great for generating use cases about what they're currently experiencing, but what I find we gets lost or gets missed in that team discussion are the things that they haven't even tried yet, or maybe things that they've given up on that they don't do because they just don't have the resources to accomplish that, and so they've just eliminated that from their normal process, even from things that they think of that they think they might want to do in the future. So this is a way of reminding them of those things that maybe they've set aside for later, addressing later on. So with that broad list of use cases, you might identify, in this case, like six use cases from this team discussion. And I've just highlighted like some random use cases here, but you're going to take those and compare them ultimately to the top-down approach. And the way I like to start that is to start with this simple quadrant system. This is kind of based on a Boston Consulting Group quadrant that they developed to identify sort of business segments. I like to apply this to AI opportunities as well. So the axes here, the vertical axis goes from at the bottom, the most difficult to execute with regard to an AI solution, up to the top, which indicates an easier effort to execute on. The horizontal axis is the benefit to the organization. So over to the left is lower benefit. That organization is not going to get much out of that exercise. Then all the way over to the right is the higher benefit. So the easier tasks with the highest benefit to the organization would fall into this first quadrant number 1 in the green there. In my view, the second order of AI use cases that we should go after would be in quadrant 2 there, which are easier to implement, but may have less benefit to the organization. And I'm not so certain we want to spend a lot of time on things that have very little benefit to the organization, but I do think we want to go for the easy wins first and establish a track record of success before we try to tackle some of the harder projects that might have a higher benefit to the organization that would fall into that third quadrant. And then the items that fall into the difficult tier with lower benefit to the organization, those would be in that fourth quadrant, which we probably may not ever get to at all. But those would certainly be the ones that we would approach last from a priority perspective. So putting some of our use cases in here, things like A labor market scan would be a pretty easy automation to write, I think, in most cases, depending upon what tools they're using today. It's essentially automating something that's being done through just sheer effort right now. It's probably something that can be automated. So I put that in a easier category with a potential higher value to the organization. Now, labor market scan, you might not think of as a very high value use case, but if you are overpaying people for a role and you hire more than a couple people for that role, all of a sudden you're spending a lot more money than is necessary. The other side of that is if you're not offering enough for a particular role, you're not going to be able to attract the top candidates. So the people that you will attract to that job may not be the best fit for the organization or be able to perform that job as well as other people who might be looking for higher compensation. So it actually has a very high return to the organization, although some of those might be in some more qualitative spheres rather than true quantitative elements. Real-time interview note structuring, I think that's one of the ones that generally easier to do. You just have to have a good recording element in your interview process. But the value to the organization's probably not terribly high. I think you'd have to, come up with a very unique and compelling cost structure as well as benefit structure to the organization to be able to provide a high return on that project. So that falls in the category or the quadrant, second quadrant there. Um, uh, Job offer decision support, again, probably maybe a middle level effort there, but the value to the organization is probably not tremendous. There's probably not a lot of effort that's being put in terms of um, deciding who is the best candidate. Once you narrow it down to a select few, that is easily implementable from an from an AI perspective, and so therefore the return to the organization is probably going to be a little bit lower there. High volume application triage. If we can automate some of I think this is one of the biggest pain points in HR. It may not be quite as easy as some of the other opportunities, but it has a huge benefit to the organization, making sure that you're actually reviewing in some methodical way all of the applicants that apply to a job, because you don't want to lose a great applicant simply because you became exhausted, for example, of looking through resumes for a particular role. Maybe you had filled your interview quota and anyone else who applies is no longer going to even be considered. You might even not even review that resume anymore because you've sort of identified enough candidates to fill the role. That's not fair to the people applying for the job. It's probably not fair to the organization because there may be some great people that would continue to apply to that job. Setting up an automated system to alert you when a very strong candidate applies is an easy way of making sure you can capture that value. A job performance optimizer, a little bit more difficult to implement. There are a couple different ways you might do this, but doing it systematically is possible, but a little bit more difficult. And a lot of this might be outsourced by a recruiting agency or some other vendor. So it's a little bit more challenging to implement, and the value there might also be lower because hopefully, if you are outsourcing it, that vendor is doing some optimization already. Evaluating employee performance. And so what's the thinking is here is evaluating employees over the course of a time frame rather than doing it just periodically, like once a year, where most organizations are. Harder to implement, and not certain there's a ton of value there for the organization, and because it's not a formal process, right? You would have to rely on information that may not be as relevant or may not be as accurate as a traditional formal review process would entail. uh, resume parsing and into a structured profile. So this is essentially creating a database of all the resumes that you're receiving in a very systematic and uniform way. Probably a little bit more difficult to accommodate because people have a broad spectrum of resumes that they submit. So being able to pull out the relevant pieces might be a little bit more challenging, and figuring out what the right structure is across all the different specific job roles that you may be recruiting for might be a little bit more of a challenge. But the value to the organization over time might be great, because as a job opens up, maybe you have a job, someone has submitted a resume for a certain job role 3 months ago. They weren't selected to pursue that job, but maybe they're better suited for a job that's now open. You being able to go back to that particular applicant and say, hey, we think we have a great fit for you, could provide a tremendous value to the organization. And then recruiting process compliance. I put this down as a difficult to implement with a lower benefit to the organization. This is one of those areas where I actually try to steer away from anything that might result in me having to deal with an attorney. And trying to come up with a compliance framework for a recruiting process would probably involve a lot of lawyers and a lot of process time, a lot of back and forth. And to be perfectly honest, we're just too busy to deal with things that have a large compliance risk component in there. So that's just the way we operate our business. We will certainly do it if the client insists upon it, but it's not our favorite type of consulting work to conduct.
Hey, Stephen, just quick
Yeah,
question. Sorry,
yeah.
for the use, let me find my words, for the applicant triage, are you seeing organizations kind of staying clear of that, kind of going back to the old school methodology? Because I read some things, but where too many people are building AI specific type resumes to match the words of the job description and everybody's scoring high. Is that
Yeah,
what
yeah.
no?
That is absolutely a thing. And I don't see people going back to the old way necessarily. I see them going to more holistic approaches, more holistic reviews within their applicant triage processes. So they sort of can screen out the ones that don't offer those keywords or highly relevant keywords. They may not be the exact keywords that they put in the job description, but screening out the ones that clearly don't fit, and then taking that screen for the ones that have done the keyword stuffing into their resume, along with the folks who might just naturally be qualified and haven't done that, taking that to a second level of review. So now they're no longer screening for those keywords anymore. They're now looking at it more holistically.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So this is a very rudimentary, very basic way of sort of structuring and prioritizing potentially use cases. I like to use this process first because it starts to get the client to think about the trade-offs and to think about some of the components that are involved in each one of these use cases. They may have their favorite, but when it shows up in quadrant number 4, because it's super difficult to execute on and may not have as much quantifiable value back to the organization, they understand that they may be taking on some risk if they really want to push for that use case. And so here we can talk about let's go for the singles and doubles first. Let's build a reputation of success, and then maybe we can try some of the harder things. So an effective framework, I think, to get them thinking about um, the the pros and cons of various use cases. Now we want to take this to a next level and actually winnow this use case universe down to something that's more actionable. And for this, I use this matrix. And the matrix, I've kind of summarized this, but across the top here, these are the KPIs and the strategic objectives that the HR organization is trying to manage. So we have the time it takes to fill a vacancy, the cost that it takes to fill a vacancy, One of the things about cost here that I don't think I mentioned previously, and it's not only the cost of the recruiting process, but it's the cost of having the vacancy to the organization. Like if we are tasked with recruiting a salesperson because we have an opening in our sales organization, the cost of the organization could be huge. And the cost of recruiting could be minor. And if we take 4 months to replace that salesperson, that's 4 months of gross margin that the organization has just lost that could have been generated by that salesperson if we had been able to figure that out. So as we're looking at some of these use cases, it's not necessarily the direct cost, but the indirect cost of some of these activities as well. I just want to make sure that you keep that in mind. So the next element across the top here is quality, making sure that we're up leveling our quality throughout this entire process. Quality of hires generally is what we're referring to there. The acceptance rates, the experience, the recruiting experience. And again, all of this is within the talent acquisition segment of operations. So these are all very specific to talent acquisition. The source of the candidate, the fairness of the process, and then what quadrant did it fall into? And that's just referring back to these quadrant numbers here. So once we have that, we are going to lay all of our potential use cases out that and we're going to eliminate. We did that in the prior section with the quadrant. Eliminate the overlaps. So these are the unique use cases. We've got, I think, 7 here. And then we're going to score them, or at least indicate which ones impact which of our objectives. And just, this is a very rough thing for the presentation. You might actually have some additional variables, maybe using a number format like 1 through 10 might be more effective here than just a yes, no binary type of indicator here. But for the purposes of this presentation, I was actually, just wanted to make it simple. But, so for example, market scanning compensation would help you reduce the amount of time that it took to acquire a candidate because you would have the right compensation structure to begin with. It reduced the overall cost because you wouldn't have to have as many redos or as much negotiation when you're finally making the offer. It would increase your acceptances. It would increase the overall experience of the candidate. It would also increase the fairness of the process. And that coincidentally sits in quadrant 1 of our quadrant that we just reviewed here. So that's just how I would fill that out. Do that across the board for all of the opportunities. And then what you're going to have are the ones that sort of naturally fall out as strong opportunities. So the market scan, the interview notes, and the applicant triage seem to hit most of the strategic objectives of the organization, most of the KPIs that are being tracked by the leadership and reported up to executive management, as well as are generally easier to accomplish and providing the most value to the organization as well. So then the last piece of this is mapping it and workflow mapping it. I think that was one of the questions that we had previously. And while you're doing this, you're also identifying your cost structure. So I didn't fill this out because you're going to do this for each of the use cases that you've shortlisted through that process. But you're going to want to map out the entire process, understand the investment that the HR organization or even other organizations are making in that workflow, and then try to assign dollar values to that. So let's just say that this use case was to automate the generation of a job description, just randomly. Today's workflow might be someone goes to HR and says, "Hey, I've got an opening in my company." First thing HR is going to ask is say, "Okay, send me over the job description." And that person's going to be like, "Well, this person's been around for like a dozen years, and quite honestly, I don't have a job description for them." So HR is going to be like, "Huh, I can't do anything without a job description, so you need to create a job description." And that manager is going to be like, I create jobs descriptions like once every 3 years. I'm not exactly certain how to do that. I may not even know everything that this person did. And so you get into this back and forth and this delay. Um, that workflow is going to have, certain investments that are being required throughout the organization, and we can quantify that. So you're going to take that all the way through that mapping process of coaching that person through the job description creation process, having the initial draft sent over to HR, having HR edit it, return it to that hiring manager to make sure the edits are appropriate. Then you're going to go out and do the market search on what compensation would be for this particular candidate. Then you're going to send it to your recruiting firm, and there's going to be questions back and forth there, and then eventually the job's going to be posted. So there's a bunch of steps, bunch of costs associated with that. And then you're going to map out the process for your hypothetical solution. This does not have to be a very specific and very finite design solution. This is not you publishing a statement of work back to your customer about the things that you're actually going to do. This is very high level. We're looking for a rough order of magnitude on this. So you're going to lay out the steps of how you can have an AI interview with the hiring manager to describe what the person who's no longer in that role did for the organization. That will be able to, that transcript of that call, that recorded call, will be able to be put into another AI agent and create a job description or job requirements document from that transcript. That job requirements document could then be sent directly to HR. They could review it first, get all of their comments in it, and send the sort of mature job description back to the hiring manager for final approval. Once they click off on it, then it could go directly to the recruiting organization. You can eliminate a bunch of steps and a bunch of costs, and streamline their process. That's what I think we all try to work towards within our engagements. So you're going to want to identify the rough order of magnitude costs of your solution as well. And those costs will end up in a business case. Now, creating a business case, a lot of us are not necessarily comfortable with creating a financial analysis. I would say there are a lot of tools out there to help you figure out how to create a business case for various opportunities. This is a very rudimentary one, but I will say the three things I will leave with you, having worked with a lot of CFOs on a lot of IT projects, technology projects. They have been promised the world, and very rarely are the promises delivered on. So they're super skeptical. They're very crusty. And if you put too rosy of a picture on your business case, you're going to lose credibility and you're going to be stopped dead in your tracks. Maintaining your credibility in a financial review is of the utmost importance. It's the one thing that I would never, ever compromise on. So don't ever try to shade things to the upside. Don't ever make guesses on benefits unless you've clearly disclosed that guess. My preference is to actually just identify it as a benefit, to say there's upside here. We have no way of quantifying it. You will gain a ton of credibility with the financial review process in doing that, and you'll have a much easier time getting your projects approved. But anyway, let's kind of go through some of the line items. Always list out, I believe you should always list out your assumptions first. That's the first thing that any experienced financial person is going to look for, is like, I know the math probably works. Tell me how you came up with the numbers that you put into the spreadsheet. Tell me what assumptions you're making, because if I don't agree with your assumptions, I don't care what the math says. This is probably not going to work for me. So let's agree on the assumptions first. So identify your development costs. What are your build costs? And then what are your ongoing monthly costs? Maybe you want to have a monthly maintenance retainer associated with. Maybe there are tools that the customer has to subscribe to that have a monthly cost. Maybe those monthly costs have a usage component, like tokens or something of that nature. So you're going to have to forecast into the future what some of these costs are. So, but do your best and document those assumptions and how those assumptions were developed. Now we can talk about the savings. The savings might come across a number of different elements. I've only listed a few here. Monthly hours. So in this a job description writing assumption that or hypothetical that I just went through that workflow on, you might have been able to save 2 hours of a manager's time just in the original crafting of it, and then maybe an hour of HR review and so forth. Identify all of those hours saved across the entire workflow and identify the fully loaded costs per hour. You're working with HR. They should be able to tell you what the fully loaded cost is. And what do I mean by fully loaded? If you have an employee, let's say that makes, just to make the math easy, $60,000 a year, that is their annual salary, but that is not what they cost the organization to support. That employee has overhead costs. They have space. They have benefits. They they have health care, maybe life insurance. They might be taking family medical leave at some point, which may or may not be paid by the organization. They have supervisory costs, and it's not just their immediate supervisor. It's all the way up the hierarchical chain as to what that individual employee costs the organization. Try to consider all of those different costs. So when HR says, oh, the fully loaded cost of that $60,000 a year salary is more like 72, so 20% more, I would challenge them to ask them what costs they've considered. They may only be considering the benefits and the hard dollar costs of that employee, because most of the time a fully loaded labor rate will be about 30%, maybe even 35% over the direct labor rate. So that direct labor rate would be the $60,000. So you're really looking for something more like 30% over, which would be in this example, $78,000 as a fully loaded. And then you can divide by 2,100, which is 2,080 actually, which is essentially 52 weeks times 40 hours a week, and get a per hour cost. If in this particular example, excuse me, in this particular example, I included, I was looking at time to fill a vacancy on this. So this is the reduced time to fill, not line item. So that would be particular to that use case. Every use case might have their different components that you want to include. This is where you want to understand in the time to fill a position, require an employee, the cost of the vacancy to the broader organization. The HR cost will pale and compare to the cost to the organization. And if it's not in sales, let's say it's some other role like a customer service representative. Well, for that customer service representative vacancy, other customer service representatives might have to be working overtime to take the take the hours, absorb the hours of this of that vacancy. So what is that cost of overtime? It's not just the direct labor rate plus their fully loaded cost structure. It's now an overtime labor rate. So just want to make sure that you understand all of those different cost components that go into the particular use case that you're trying to address here. A couple of these dots here saying there's probably a lot more. And each of these particular use cases might have specific variables that don't apply to the other use cases. I like to put all of this in one business case summary, though, for the executive leader that we're talking to, so they can see the built-up costs and the built-up benefits to the organization, and do a quick side-by-side comparison. Because when we do get into monthly savings, or maybe it's actually an increase in cost, they're going to want to know that across these three, because they may not be able to prioritize all three. Maybe they just want to do one. So which one is going to be the most impactful for the organization? So you're going to want to identify the monthly saving costs. That's sort of the run rate. Month in, month out, this is what you can expect in terms of reduced costs or maybe even increased costs. You're going to want to do a break even. So if there's an upfront investment, if there's a development cost or an onboarding cost or a training cost or whatever I might incur one time to get this program implemented, how many months of savings does it take to pay that investment, that initial upfront investment off? So that's the months to break even. If I'm a finance person, that's one of the first things I look for is, okay, you're promising me savings, but and there's an upfront investment here, but realistically, when am I going to make my money back? When am I going to be neutral on this? And then I would put in a 12-month ROI and then an ongoing ROI. The ongoing ROI would be if there are monthly ongoing costs, you can calculate an ROI based upon those monthly ongoing costs versus the monthly savings. The 12-month ROI uh, is sort of a compromise. My preference would be to show them what the in-year budget impact is of this. But if you don't know when you're going to be implementing this process, and if you don't know what the overall budget impact is going to be for the remaining term of their existing budget, just do a 12-month ROI. And then later on, when you get a little bit closer to implementing whatever use case you're leading off with, then you can actually start to look at what's the impact going to be to my current period budget. And you want to be very sensitive to their in-year budget, because the last thing you want to leave your new HR leader relationship with is a mess that they have to explain to finance because they went over budget because they were implementing a new AI platform. So help them understand that impact to their budget. Most leaders will be on top of it, but don't assume that they are that's how they're thinking about this. They may just be seeing the efficiencies and want to capture those efficiencies right away. If there's especially a large cost, you're going to want to make sure that they understand that how that might impact their budget. So that's essentially the consulting process. I'm not going to get into how to actually, get into the statement of work. The further evaluation that probably is outside the scope of this series. My intent, but I'm very happy to hear any suggestions you have, is for the last piece of this series, the last session in 2 weeks. We'll talk about how to use the HR organization to get into other organizational groups. That's just sort of my immediate thought process. But if you guys have anything that you want to suggest, I'm all ears as to what might be valuable to you guys for the next round. With that, I am done, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to come off mute to talk,
Welcome.
you're getting rounds of applause.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Sorry for going over a few minutes. I wasn't tracking the time.
That is not a problem. Everyone kind of held on tight. Here's the feedback form for you as well, for anyone who wants to fill that out. And everyone seemed very grateful and thankful, and I certainly am as well. And I'm thankful for all of you who have come to these meetings, and see you throughout the rest of the week. And Stephen, I look forward to seeing you again, hopefully very soon.
Thank you. Appreciate everyone's time. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.